Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hey there, everyone. It's AZ back for yet another episode of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I am here with my good friend, Jay Dawes. We are in a random hotel in the middle of Indiana. Why, you might ask? Well, tomorrow we are presenting together with our friend Troy Torrance at the Indiana Public Safety Health Symposium. Jay, say hello to the people.
Hi, everybody.
This is already take two. Annette forgot to hit record on the first take. Luckily, it was only 90 seconds into the podcast. So, firing on all cylinders. As usual, I like to tell everyone how I met my guest. We met in an elevator in a hotel that was under construction while we were both at the NSCA revising the TSAC practitioner course. So anyway, I always start all of these podcasts, Jay, with my rapid fire questions. Jay, who are you?
Oh, wow. So in short, My purpose, I guess, is to help improve health, fitness, and occupational performance for first responders.
Very cool. Can you see already why I like Jay? Jay, what sets your soul on fire?
Really just helping people. I mean, I think that's, by and large, wanting to help improve, individuals' overall quality of life, because really when you do that, you don't only touch them, but you improve the quality of lives for everybody around them as well.
100%. It's like that force multiplication that we keep talking about. All right, Jay, this is a really hard question. Take your time. How are you changing the world?
Oh, wow. Hopefully one person at a time. So we're, trying to help educate people, trying to help disseminate information to help them basically individualize the types of changes they need to make in their life to, again, overall improve their overall health and performance.
I endorse this. I like it. Jay, you're kind of like one of the OGs in tactical. I mean, I'm going to say you are. So how did you actually get into it?
Yeah, and I've heard several people call me one of the OGs, which means I'm an old guy and I've been around for a while. But no, really, it was really just right place at the right time, and was really fortunate to when the tactical strength conditioning program started at the NSCA. I had been hired on as education director there in 2007. And Mark Stevenson had been doing a lot of work with 10th Group and also the Colorado Springs SWAT team. And really, he came to me one day and said, I think this program has legs, and I think this is something that could be taken out to the masses that would be really helpful. And originally we started moving forward on the program. I think, I've told this story before, but ironically enough, it wasn't necessarily fully supported at first, not for necessarily a negative reason, but I think the NSCA was originally concerned that it didn't really fit the mission of the NSCA dealing with athletic performance. And that's when we had to really make the case for these individuals being tactical athletes. And when we say that, not necessarily that they're athletic, but they should get the same services that an elite level athlete gets. So if we're concerned about the performance of a athlete and we're going to provide them the different services necessary in order to help facilitate that, then first responders really should get that. And that's really kind of what set me on fire with this. And prior to that, really the majority of my career was more in the athletic performance space, and really it just completely shifted my whole career path.
So you left the NSCA, and then what did you do?
Yeah, so when I left the NSCA, I actually moved to Corpus Christi, Texas, and taught down there at Texas A&M Corpus Christi for about 3 years. While I was down there, I was really, really fortunate to get a chance to work with the Corpus Christi Police Department as well. And just an amazing group of people down there. They really took me in and let me come in and kind of help with some of the different things that they were doing. And worked a little bit with the SWAT team, but really mostly with their training academy. Originally, most of my experience had been kind of with the top teams and things of that nature, with like your SWAT and special units and things of that nature. And when I went down there, they said, "Hey, that's great, but they kind of got things down. Like, we really need more help at the academy level." And again, it was just a great experience because, getting to get people when they first walk in the door to, their new career and profession, trying to get them off to the right start and try to help give them some things that'll be useful for them over the occupational lifespan.
And while you were in Corpus Christi, were you doing research and publishing research?
Sort of. I was really pretty terrible at it at that point, to be honest with you. So to be full disclosure, so I didn't have a super traditional Ph.D. experience. I got my Ph.D. from Oklahoma State. However, before I moved to Colorado, I had about 32 hours in residence. Most of that was my coursework. During that whole time, I actually owned a gym, was teaching at another university, and I didn't really have a whole lot of research experience. And whenever I got the job offer at the NSCA, I talked to my mentor about it. He said, "Man, you got to take that job." And I said, "Well, how am I going to finish this?" He said, "Well, if anybody can do it, you'll figure it out." And so after 8 short years, I became
That's amazing.
I became a doctor. Not, and as my daughter says, not a real doctor or the kind that helps people, but one that teaches. But yeah, essentially, when I got out of the PhD program and I finished up when I was in Corpus Christi, I really, from a research perspective, didn't know what the hell I was doing. And that wasn't really necessarily from a fault of anybody that was mentoring me. It was just the fact that I just didn't have a whole lot of experience. So kind of bluntly, I spent the first 3 years just trying to figure out how to do this. So I did produce some research down there, definitely not to the extent that I have since I left. But really, like I said, the first 3 years was just trying to get my bearings and figuring things out. And frankly, I left probably a whole lot more data on the lab floor than I ever got to publish. So yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
So would you say you had a very average experience with your PhD?
No, so the PhD was fantastic. However, I would say I was very average as far as my understanding. Like I said, everybody that was a mentor for me was fantastic. It's just it's just like sports. I didn't have the reps. So basically, they taught me how to go through the research process. They taught me, how to do it correctly. I just didn't have a whole lot of experience doing it because I was busy being a practitioner at the time. So it really was one of the things where when I went down to Corpus, I kind of just threw myself in the deep end and tried to figure it out. And like I said, arguably, I was not great at first. And like I said, arguably, as we joke about for being aggressively mediocre, I'm probably that now. But I think that's... in reality, there was I don't know if you guys remember, there's a strength coach named Steve Plisk. Steve's a brilliant man. But he said, in order to be a better specialist, you need to be a better generalist. And I think in a lot of ways, that's kind of the space that I fill, is I'm pretty okay at most things, but I wouldn't say I'm really just fantastic at anything. But I am pretty good at knowing what my limitations are and finding the right people to help complement what I do to make sure that we have a good product at the end of the day.
So one of the things that Jay and I joke about all the time is being mediocre, being average, but actually he has absolutely weaponized that as a way of excelling in both his career and his life and in the way that he coaches people. Jay, I'm going to put you on the spot and I want you to tell them about your SWAT test that you recently completed. Tell them about the SWAT test, Jay.
Oh, I can't believe you outed me on that. Okay, cool. So, all right. So I'm doing a lot of work with the Stillwater Special Operations team, and just an amazing group of human beings. And they asked me to come out to help them do some selections for a Oklahoma SWAT competition that they were doing. And so they had to do basically an obstacle course / relay race type scenario. And they wanted me to help narrow that down to maybe the top 5 people that I thought would be successful. So I did that, and we get to the end of it, and they go, "Hey, Doc, you want to run it?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, sure."
Of course I do.
And I don't know that I really did. However, I wanted to make sure that the guys knew that I was in, and that if they're doing it, I'm willing to put myself out there. And even though I would may look ridiculous doing it, they needed to know that I was willing to put myself through the things that they were willing to do to a point, obviously. So basically, they put me in the gear, and I threw the door open, and I came out hot, and I was, keeping a really good clip, and everybody was cheering. It was fantastic. And there's one specific segment where you had to hit a telephone pole with a battering ram. And by the time I got to that point, I mean, I've been over and under obstacles and through, mock windows and things of that nature. And I get to that point, and I'm still feeling great. And I hit the telephone pole 5 times, and the next step I took, I'm like, uh-oh. And it hit me, and I went way anaerobic, and I'm like, I don't know if I can bring myself back down enough to actually get this thing done. But I'm like, all right, well, everybody's watching, so don't stop. And there's kind of that duality of it too, is like, being the quote unquote fitness guy. It's like, all right, just don't stop. You got to keep moving. And so there's a slight uphill the rest of the way. You get around to the staging area, and you have to do like 5 up downs. And, kind of like I'm up, they see me, I'm down, kind of a, 3 to 5 second drill almost, or 3 to 5 second rush. After that, they had a 185-pound dummy that you had to pick up and pull into the back of the car. And whenever you did that, it was done. And so I did it, and had a really decent time. So they were all pretty excited about that, and they were really pumped up that I actually did it. And so at that point, I was pretty worn out, so I just had a seat, and the guys go like, all right, we're going to go back to the station, and we'll see in a little bit. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go, got to run home real quick, and then I'll be there. And as soon as I got my car, all of a sudden, like, it started going narrow. I'm like, uh-oh, like, I might be getting ready to pass out. And so I kind of sat there and got my bearings for a second. I'm like, okay, you got to pull this together, man. So I did. And I drove across town, and by the time I get to my neighborhood, I'm like, gosh, dang it, I'm gonna have to throw up. And I pull into the neighborhood, and all of a sudden there's like a couple cars that pull in behind me, and I'm like, all right, you can't like just throw up here in the middle of the street. You're gonna look like a day drunk. So I'm like, all right, have some respect and get home and throw up in your backyard, like you should, and have some dignity. So I did that, and then I kind of fell into my hot tub for 10 minutes, and yeah, after that I was sweet, but it was a challenge, to say the very least.
I have questions. What was the qualifying cutoff time?
So the qualifying cutoff time was under 6 minutes to be on the team. However, they were all trying to get under 4:30. I hit 3:18. So yeah, but there was a significant cost that went along with that. So.
And Jay, you're how old?
46.
At 46 years old, he completed the SWAT qualification obstacle course under a minute, or over a minute under the qualifying time. So the message that I would like you to hear is that this man being mediocre throughout his life has paid off in spades.
Well, I'll say this, like, again, I'm definitely not the most talented. I'm not the brightest. However, like, I usually don't quit, and it's really hard to outwork me. So it's like I'll usually keep going, usually to a fault, to be honest. But anyway.
All right. Annette has lost control of the podcast. We're going to get back on track. All right. So Jay, you're at Corpus Christi, and you said you were there for 3 years.
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, so 3 years later, I actually had 2 job offers, or 2 opportunities to apply for jobs. And I ended up not getting one and got offered a position at University of Colorado Springs, which ended up being the best thing that could have happened to me at that point. Because when I got back there, I was very fortunate to get introduced to Trooper Ryan Holmes and Charlie Kornhauser. And again, just two amazing human beings who have become 2 of my best friends in reality, but also just fantastic collaborators as well. But I was actually referred from Captain Ed Shannon at the Corpus Christi Police Department to the guys at the Colorado State Patrol, and had the opportunity to work with them for kind of off and on for about 6 years. And yeah, just again, an amazing experience. And I think really that's to their credit. They were so incredibly progressive with what they were doing. And again, I was very fortunate to be there just at the right time to kind of be a part of that. So. And
was there sort of a theme of the research that you were doing in collaboration with those troopers?
There was numerous themes, actually. So originally, we started out, we were going to try and create some kind of online training materials in order to disseminate out to the troopers. Because again, they had roughly, I think at that time, don't quote me on this, but I want to say about 760 uniformed officers that were spread all over the state. And so basically we were trying to figure out some way to get them the materials necessary in order to be proficient for their job and to, handle their fitness and wellness and things of that nature. And that was honestly before a lot of the, newer apps and things like that had came out. So we were trying to put something together in that space in order to help get that information out to them. I'd say a little less than a year into that, we actually got called in by the chief. And which I thought we were just going to have a nice meeting with the chief and his administrative assistant.
It's never a nice meeting with chiefs, Jay.
Well, and it was funny. And I walked in, and there's like 18 administrators in there who are pretty high ranking in that organization. And I'm like, what the hell have I walked into? And so I just sat down and shut up because wasn't really exactly sure what we were getting into. And basically, they said they wanted to try to move forward with creating a validated fitness standard. And so, really the work that Charlie and Ryan and I did was really centered around that for probably the next three years or so. In order to collect that data, we had about a 4-month time frame where we were trying to get all that information together and all the data collected in order to make some kind of actionable recommendations for the State Patrol. And again, it was a pretty intense period as far as like trying to get that data collected. I mean, and I think if memory serves, when we were asked like how long it would take, I'm like, well, it's going to take about a year, and probably close to $100,000 to do this whole thing. And they said, you got 4 months, and we can spend about $4,000. Can you do it? I'm like, well, it's ambitious. We can try, because I didn't want to say no, because it's one of those things where I think we all knew that it was our opportunity to help do a lot of good for a lot of folks if we could pull it off. And I definitely made no guarantees, but during that time frame, again, we collected a lot of information that really helped guide best practices within that organization and association. So we were pretty proud of that.
And I love this segue, because one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was fit for duty standards. And many agencies, many individuals, I hear them making comments like, we need a fit for duty standard, or we need standards in general. And the possible tripping points that I see are that these standards are sort of arbitrary.
Right.
So we're having them do XYZ obstacle course, and they need to do it in 2 minutes, and it's very arbitrary. So can you sort of back it up and tell us about the research that you did to validate your standards, and then anything that happens sort of after that process?
Yeah, so it's the whole validation business is a really interesting business, because you have to. So I guess to back up, when we started that whole process, basically we were all in agreement that at some point in time we were going to be sitting in court, and we need to be able to justify why we did what we did. And the reality of it is even at that rate, that doesn't mean that we were going to be successful. We just had to have a reason for it, because I think, Annette, to your point, I think a lot of times what happens is people will set kind of an arbitrary standard. For instance, like I worked with one organization in the past where their minimum number of push-ups that they did was 22. And so after I kind of asked a few more questions, like, well, guess what? That's how many the chief can do. So that's why it was 22.
Arbitrary.
So, with that being said, you got to be really, really careful about that process. So when we started that process with the Colorado State Patrol in particular, we actually looked at 2 different fitness standards, which sounds a little bit contradictory, but we started looking at it from the approach of if you are a uniformed officer versus a cadet, like you really have a different job. So a cadet's job is to train, whereas a uniformed officer's job is to be an officer. With a cadet schedule, it's very prescribed. And I mean, to some extent, if you say, hey, 4 weeks into training at 9 a.m. in the morning on Tuesday, where are they going to be? We're probably going to have a pretty good idea what that looks like. So it's one of those things where with them, when we started looking at what their job was to do, was really to be able to survive training and to be able to become an officer. So with them, we kind of looked at a little bit different, in a little bit different lens, where we said, okay, what's the primary reason why people have to exit academy? And with this particular academy, it was injury. So basically what we did is we went back in and we did some prediction equations and looked at individuals that got hurt versus those that did not. So very unsophisticated stats. up front on my part. Literally, we just did a basic T-test and go, hey, guess what? The people who tend to get through tend to be more fit than those that don't. So we established that first. Then we started looking at each one of the individual metrics. And so I think we had, vertical jump, push-up, sit-up, and beep test. And as we started going back in and look at those numbers, what we saw is that in general, people that had fewer than 32 push-ups had about a 50% chance of getting through the academy. Individuals who had fewer than 39 shuttles on the beep test had about a 40% chance of getting through. But when we combine those two factors, so if you did fewer than 32 push-ups and had fewer than 39 shuttles, your odds of getting through went down to 14%.
Dang.
So that was one of the things where we actually just gave that to recruiters and said, look, we're not giving you a hard and fast cut score here. If you want to select somebody, you're fully within your rights to do that. But just recognize this is another deciding factor whenever you're making that choice is if they look like this, their odds of getting through may be pretty poor. And what I think the overall estimate was for every cadet that was recycled, it was basically about $170,000 for the state of Colorado.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So, and honestly, that's just looking at kind of the training costs. That's not necessarily taking into account, okay, now you've got, this trooper that was supposed to be at this, substation, and now you're down a person there because they didn't get through. Mm-hmm. So now that puts a stress and toll on the rest of the troopers. So, that's really not even looking at the total full picture, but that was, the best we could kind of extrapolate out. But basically what they did is they used that standard when they went out and recruited. And over the next 5 to 6 training academies, if memory serves, I think they only reported 2 individuals that had to exit due to either injury or an illness. So one gentleman unfortunately had cancer, and then another individual I think rolled their ankle when they were on a run. So in previous to that, if memory serves, I think they were losing close to 20%.
That's outstanding.
Yeah, and looking at it was really interesting for all of us that were involved in that process when you really start breaking it down, look at the metrics, and looking at, okay, what does a successful cadet look like? And the one thing I do want to provide caution with on that is like that was for this particular academy. So if you belong to an academy where maybe they don't do a lot of push-ups and they don't do a lot of endurance work, it may be different metrics that you would have to look at. But the process kind of works the same way. So yeah, it was really interesting to us, and I think by and large it helped make sure that the individuals that were getting into academy had a better chance of getting through and opportunity to become officers.
So it's just informing your decision when you're recruiting. That's amazing. Yeah. So, and then did you repeat that process with incumbents as well?
We tried. We actually ran into a whole lot of snags. At that point in time, there was a lawsuit that was pretty notable that was going on in Colorado. And it put all that just to a grinding halt as far as that went. Now, I can say this. The standard was never implemented. However, from that, profile-wise, we could pretty much tell you the people who are going to be more successful on job tasks. So, looking at that, what we saw is like people, if you could do roughly 30 to 40 push-ups and sit-ups and, roughly 40 shuttles on a beep test, you were probably going to be fine. That didn't mean you're necessarily going to be outstanding, but that meant that you could at least probably meet some minimum competencies and things of that nature.
You might be mediocre.
You might be mediocre.
Or average. Okay. So have you had personal experience in this process in fire for fit for duty or no?
I haven't had it to the same extent in fire. So in the past, what we try to do is we try to go back in and look at some of the injury data and try to predict who would and who would not get through. To be honest, one of the biggest challenges that we've had is with some of the agencies that I worked with, the recording process wasn't as detailed as it was with the Colorado State Patrol, so we weren't able to make those extrapolations. But we have looked at that over, trying to do some longitudinal work with some of those different groups. Yet we haven't done it yet, though.
Okay. And so if there is a chief out there or a training and safety officer from an agency that's listening and saying, you know what, we've been kicking around this idea of fit for duty for years. We really, really need to look into it. What are sort of your best tips, your best practices, your things that, be careful to not to trip over this pothole, what would you tell those agencies?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just making sure that whatever standard you set is defensible. And when I say that, like, is this reasonable? Regardless of age, sex, is this what a firefighter needs to do in order to be successful at their job? Now, the challenge with that is defining what successful means, because that bar kind of changes depending on who you ask. I know that the CPAT is done traditionally as, kind of an entry-level test and, to get you in the door. There's been a lot of agencies that kind of refer back to that as kind of their standard, which intuitively kind of makes sense. But, if you're going in and saying, like, for instance, you need to do X number of push-ups, sit-ups, or, be able to run a 1.5 mile test in a certain amount of time, that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging, because if you can't show a manifest relationship between those fitness tests to the actual job tasks, then the opportunity for litigation goes way up at that point.
Did you ever have to go to court?
I have not yet.
Amazing. That's
However,
amazing.
not yet. So
Not yet.
I'm fully prepared, and I'm sure it will happen someday.
So I'm just going to be honest with you and throw it out here. I do not know a lot about how the CPAT was validated. Is that something that you have sort of expertise in that you can explain to the listeners?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the CPAT was validated. I do know that if you look at a lot of different occupational tests, there's a few things that you need to do in order to go through that process. Really, the biggest one is it's going to require subject matter experts to go in and validate that whatever standard being set is in fact accurate. So, like, for instance, like a casualty extraction. So let's say that was an essential job task that you have to perform in order to do your job. So with that, there's three main variables that I really need to know in order to help narrow that down, in order to figure out what the standard should be. So the first one is, how much should that victim weigh? If I've worked with one group in the past where the victim was 120 pounds. And it's like, okay, that's kind of a child at that point.
That's a child.
And so we looked at the average weight of the person in that agency, and it was 205 pounds. And so we started looking at that, and this was a law enforcement group. So with duty belt gear and all that, it was roughly about 225. So we set the weight of the dummy at 225, which a lot of people did not like that very much. But the thing about it was we could explain it and justify it. And I think that was the key is, we understand that you may not like it. However, it's reasonable to assume that if you get into a bad situation, you may have to pull your partner out of harm's way. So we need to make sure that you can do that. The second part of that is, like, with that particular test, is how far to drag them. So what is a reasonable distance to look at, dragging that casualty? So in that case, because that was with the Colorado State Patrol, we set it at 8.54 meters. Main reason is from the median of the intersection to the shoulder of the road, it was exactly 8.54. So we said, okay, that's reasonable based off what they'd have to do. For firefighting, I have worked with a few groups where we have discussed it, and a lot of them have said that what they would ascribe to is maybe having the casualty in a back bedroom and trying to look at what's the average distance from a back bedroom to a front door, which that would make sense, because that's, again, something that you might have to do. Oddly enough, those two things are relatively easy compared to the last one, which is the time required to do it. Because that's the thing, it's just all over the map. So when we did that particular test, we actually had 4 subject matter experts come in and rate every single person that went. And to drag them 8.54 meters, it took, I think, between, the range was 3.8 seconds to 18.5. And so we asked, okay, based off this time frame, did who passed and who failed? And everybody passed. So it's like, all right, well, it looks like as long as you can get this done in 18 seconds, then it looks like you're sweet, because we didn't really have anything else to base it. Now, the average was about 6 seconds. So that's the whole thing, is like, passing, failing, versus, preferred and ideal are completely different conversations. And I think the thing that basically keeps me up at night is, or wakes me up in the middle of the night, is when you're looking at these fitness standards, it's not necessarily what's the best that you need to be, but what's the worst that you need to be. And I hate to say that, but what is the lowest common denominator to do this job task? And that's almost where you got to set your standard. Well, it actually is where you have to set your standard, because, again, the whole point is to figure out who can do the job and who can't. Now, with that being said, we do have, again, really good information that shows the more fit you are, the better you're able to perform that job. So that's kind of information that we like to provide, is saying like, hey, here's kind of how you ranked and where you stacked up to the group. And we'll do percentile rankings and things like that, so then how they relate to their group. And also, the people who scored in, the top, maybe 75% look like this, and, so on and so forth from a fitness standpoint. So basically, at least gives people some aspirational standards to try and aim for.
So if an agency, again, they're listening to this and they're saying, okay, this all makes sense. We need to find a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
Is it reasonable to say find someone at a local area college that's sort of doing research?
Absolutely not. That's probably the worst place you can go.
Yeah?
Yeah. So we're really good at academics. We're not firefighters. and that's the one thing, is it's like I said before, just so you're standing in the garage doesn't make you a car. I can I can go in there, I can measure people, I can give you the data, I can, eyeball test, tell you like, hey, I think this would help. But the bottom line is like, I'm not a firefighter. So the firefighter is the SME. So they know what successful job performance is versus what because I watch Backdraft, but that doesn't make me an expert, right? So
that was a documentary, Jay.
Fair enough. But looking at that, I think that is the reality, is like, that's why I think in the research that I've done, I've learned a ton. I've hopefully learned as much, or I've probably learned more than the agencies I've worked with, but hopefully they've got something out of it too. But I think that is the big thing is, again, because I don't do that job, it truly is a collaborative effort where, these are the skills that I bring to the table. These are the skills that the agencies bring to the table. And we really do work together to find the best solutions.
I love that. That's amazing. So you're now at Oklahoma State.
Yes.
We sort of skipped over the interim, but you're now at Oklahoma State and you are doing research in, drumroll, firefighters, correct?
Correct.
Tell me about it. What are you researching?
Yeah. So one of the, the study that we launched off into last year, we actually got a grant to do it. We were actually going to do a 48-week training study to see if we could improve movement skills by doing individualized training programs. Really fantastic idea. Turned into a little bit of a dumpster fire, but that's okay. So it's interesting, and this is, to be blunt, it's made me question everything about the research process in this space as far as what really matters and what are we looking at. So, give you for instance, like, people did reasonably well getting up to that first 12 weeks. So we got some good pre-post data from that we can show some good change from. And the good news is most people did very well. The overwhelming majority of individuals they struggled in order to maintain the program. We had a lot of situations where people kind of drop out of the program and then all of a sudden they drop back in and say, hey, I'm back. And, hey, I was living my best life for the last month, but hey, I'm back now. And the thing about it is in reality, that's okay. It sucks for research. A journal article would absolutely tear it up, but the reality of it is it's having a big impact on that agency. And I think that's where I've kind of shifted my focus a little bit. I've really been, more of a quantitative researcher over the years, and now it's almost those qualitative aspects that you can't put a number on. How do you really measure impact? And, a lot of times, me and a lot of my colleagues will say it's not the impact factor. And that's something that you have in journal articles that, basically rate how good of a journal you got into, but it's not the impact factor, it's the actual impact that you have. And sometimes you can't put a number on it. So that's, oddly enough, I'm starting to move into a whole lot of mixed method stuff and actually qualitative research, which, if anybody listening to this is a quantitative person, that should horrify you. But it's, but I think that's the whole thing, is the numbers don't tell the full story. Give you another example. Is we have one individual who did not want to work with me. We got along fantastic, but he did not want to come in and do testing, and he did not want to get a program directly from me. I think probably some of it was maybe a little bit of embarrassment, maybe, not wanting to, kind of probably a little bit of a prideful thing. But I wrote a program for one of the people that he went through training with. And so he wanted to start working out with him. And so, very long story short, over the course of about 8 months, the guy's dropped like 30 pounds and is feeling great, looking great. Went to his pain management clinic and they said, hey, like, how are you feeling? And he said, man, I feel fantastic. I don't have any pain. They went back in, they did x-rays and MRI, and they go like, your spine is actually straightening up. And they're like, what is this black magic that you're doing? I'm like, it's just exercise. It wasn't anything crazy.
Just exercise.
And that was the thing, is like they were really excited about it. I'm like, look, I said, he was just really consistent with the program, and it's the stuff that we already know. But he had the ability to go and be consistent with it, and he got the benefit from it. But looking at that, I will never get a piece of data off that person. But it's changed his whole life. It's changed the people's life around him. It's changed the culture within the group. And I think that's the thing now that I'm really passionate about and excited about. Is like, how do we tell some of those stories that the numbers don't always reflect? And I think the coaches listening will probably understand that quite a bit. And I think for me, like you kind of alluded to it, it's like I've really been fortunate throughout my career to kind of have that blend of both coaching and research. And I think that keeps a really good balance for me, because it allows me to kind of see both sides of it and not get too stuck in an academic mindset. And vice versa on the practitioner side is, trying to be a little bit more careful about what I'm doing to make sure we can document certain things so we can actually measure improvement and progress.
The coaches listening are like, yes, I get it. The researchers listening are dying inside.
I'm sure they are, yes. Well, but I think, again, that is the reality of the situation, is like, not everything that matters can be measured by a number.
I agree 100%. So we're going to start wrapping up, because it's pretty close to dinner time here in Indiana, if we're being honest. But if you had to give perhaps your top 2, 3, 4 tips to a firefighter, maybe a younger firefighter that's just getting into the job, based on your research, based on your experience, based on everything you've seen, what tips would you give them?
Oh, well, I'm a really firm believer in keeping it simple. I think probably the number one thing is it's always easier to maintain fitness than it is to regain it after you've lost it. So just do something. And I don't want to say lower your expectations, because that sounds terrible, but some of the things we've seen is like, even as little as 13 to 15 minutes of working out per day can help preserve and maintain. And it's one of those things where overall it's not a huge time commitment, even though it does feel like it. But I think it's one of the things, just making a priority. And I tell my kids this a lot. Like last week, it was 9:30 at night, and I hadn't got my workout in. I'm like, all right, I'm going to the gym, and it's so late. I'm like, kids, I said, this is the thing I need you to remember, is like motivation and commitment are two different things. And it's one of those things like, this is one of those situations, like, I'm committed to doing it. There's no part of me that wants to go in there, but after about 10 minutes, I'm going to be fine, and it's going to be okay, and I'm going to be glad I did it. So it's really just making that commitment to do something, whatever it is.
Outstanding. I just got my quote for the podcast. Motivation and commitment are two different things. All right. Jay, is there anything that you were just dying to share that I forgot to ask you about?
Oh man, no, honestly, I'm just really grateful to be able to share whatever I can. Hopefully this is helpful for the listeners. If it's not, again, please reach out to me. I think anytime we do stuff like this, I always have that healthy fear that, it wasn't useful. So if there's other stuff that I can go into or other assistance that you need, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm an email or phone call away. So just again, don't hesitate.
Do you mind sharing that email, and I'll put it in the show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's jay.daws@okstate.edu.
All right, beautiful. Well, listeners, thank you again for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. This has been AZ and one of my favorite people, Dr. Jay Dawes, and we are out going to dinner.